4 years later, we have to ask, has Brexit been in the best interest of the population of the United Kingdom? It depends on who you're asking. Some believe that Brexit should have happened sooner, and politicians have been dragging their feet for years. Others believe that it should have never happened and was the biggest mistake in the UK's history. Brexit, that's an abbreviation for British exit. As in the UK's exit from the European Union, a supranational political and economic union between 28 countries. Well, 27 ever since Brexit took place in 2020. The population was split in two, the Remain and the Leave groups, and everyone had reasons to back up their allegiance. For the Remain group, they argued that Brexit would diminish the UK's national sovereignty. Ironically, the Leave group made almost the same argument. So, who was in the right? We know that the Leave group got what they wanted when they had a 51% majority vote during the 2016 referendum. It was a day many UK nationals celebrated, and at the helm was Boris Johnson, a staunch supporter of Brexit. Of the many arguments the eventual Prime Minister made in support of Brexit in 2016, one was job security and higher wages for the population. He argued that the Remain group, specifically the politicians who were in support of it, had created an image of a contagious mourning. Johnson said it was overwhelmingly in the economic interests of the other EU countries to do a free trade deal with zero tariffs and quotas, while we extricate ourselves from the EU lawmaking system. Suffice it to say, a majority of the UK's population, 51% to be exact, echoed his sentiments and believed that Brexit would change the UK's fortunes for the better. This was back in 2016 and restated in 2020 when the UK took the plunge and formally left the EU. Today, we're in 2024, and there was one major thing that no one accounted for: the COVID-19 pandemic. How did that impact the picture-perfect job market in the post-Brexit world? Has it impacted it at all? And is the UK regretting its decision to leave the EU or rejoicing over it? We have a lot to unravel in today's video. According to Alan Manning, a labor market economist at the London School of Economics, one of the biggest drivers for the Brexit movement was immigration and how restricting free travel would help improve the British economy by way of the UK's labor force getting better, higher-paying jobs. The Leave group argued that because of the EU's free movement regulation, a large number of foreigners were entering the UK's labor force, simply because the UK was a part of the coalition. According to the Migration Observatory, there were over 500,000 EU resident immigrants who relocated to the UK in 2016 at the time of the Brexit referendum. Leave campaigners believed that because of free movement, there was a shortage of jobs for skilled UK workers. Well, according to Alan Manning, it wasn't so much about the lack of job listings as it was about improper allocation of funds. For example, most immigrants would work in the UK's social care sector, which is notoriously underpaid and underfunded by the government. With Brexit, there might have been a restriction on the number of immigrants taking up jobs in social care, but the people of the UK didn't readily accept those terms either. In most cases, immigrant workers were preferred for the simple fact that they could be paid close to 20% less than minimum wage standards set by the UK. With these jobs now being allocated to UK residents, the pay didn't go up by an astronomical amount. It just reflected what should have been minimum wage in the first place. One of the things highlighted in the UK's autumn report was a need to offer better, higher-paying jobs to the labor force. However, Manning pointed out that while there is a shortage of jobs in some sectors, others don't see as many applicants as you'd expect because of subpar working conditions. This, in turn, has caused a standstill in some sectors. For example, the hospitality sector, which offers lower-wage jobs, otherwise picked up by immigrant workers. Olivia Midgley, editor of the Farmer's Guardian, on the other hand, believes that one of the biggest sectors that suffered because of Brexit was agriculture. Unlike the social and hospitality sectors, farming isn't a low-paying sector, yet it's facing a labor crisis. Olivia believes it's because of another issue: the unskilled workforce. The UK has traditionally been reliant on skilled immigrants to work in its agricultural sector. A sector, by the way, which has seen an overall decrease in 2023. Total income from farming, TIF, was down by 9.8% in 2023, with a net loss of £0.8 billion. Total livestock output also saw a net loss of £0.1 billion, otherwise a 0.7% decrease from 2022. She also pointed out that a farming business in the UK in 2023 reported that they'd offer 100 employment contracts to UK applicants only. This was a major fruit and veg distributor in Scotland, paying decent wages and looking for skilled laborers. Emphasis here on the word skilled, however, 6 potential employees were accepted based on relevant skills, of which only 3 turned up to work. The biggest argument Olivia presented, however, was how the Pick for Britain campaign, launched in 2020 at the time of Brexit, served as a stark reminder of how the UK's labour force, especially in the farming sector, plummeted because of Brexit. So, why did the Pick for Britain campaign fail? British jobs for British people, a primary objective of Brexit, and one that was echoed by the Pick for Britain campaign when it was launched in 2020 to showcase how the UK's labour force was entirely self-sufficient. The campaign was launched to fill the gap left by migrant workers, who would traditionally work as seasonal agricultural workers. The shortage became even more critical with the COVID-19 pandemic and stricter immigration controls. Not to forget the fact that post-Brexit UK hindered the influx of labourers coming from Eastern Europe. This otherwise perfect project, however, wrapped up within a year. Why? Because of the demanding nature of the work, logistical challenges, economic disincentives, and a lack of experience among domestic workers. And once the dust settled, everyone saw Pick for Britain in a new light. It was never perfect to begin with. It was overambitious. Campaign organizers grossly underestimated the complexities that were involved in rapidly shifting a labor market heavily reliant on experienced migrant workers to a predominantly domestic workforce. This initiative highlighted dependencies, especially within the agricultural sector, and the significant adjustments needed to transition towards a more self-sufficient labor force. The end of the free movement between the UK and EU countries created a significant labor shortfall in sectors heavily reliant on EU workers, particularly agriculture. The seasonal nature of farm work, involving physically demanding tasks such as picking fruits and vegetables, had historically relied on a transient workforce that could move freely within the EU. Then, the pandemic introduced travel restrictions and lockdown measures, further complicating the movement of migrant workers and exacerbating the existing labor shortages in agriculture. The campaign was designed to mobilize the domestic workforce, including students, to take up these seasonal agricultural jobs. It was also framed as a patriotic effort to support the nation's food security during a crisis. However, despite its intentions, Pick for Britain faced several challenges that led to its failure. Agricultural labor, especially fruit picking, is physically demanding and often involves long hours in challenging conditions. Plus, many farms are located in rural areas, requiring workers to relocate temporarily. The lack of adequate accommodation and logistical support for domestic workers, who, unlike migrant workers, were not used to living in such conditions, posed significant barriers. Migrant workers often had years of experience in agricultural work, making them more efficient and productive. British workers, on the other hand, lacked this experience, leading to lower productivity and increased training costs for farmers. And of course, pay for seasonal agricultural work was often not competitive enough to attract domestic workers, particularly when compared to the furlough payments or benefits some were receiving during the pandemic. The government underestimated the critical role that experienced migrant workers played in the agricultural sector. The assumption that this gap could be quickly filled by domestic workers without significant adjustments was unrealistic. While the Pick for Britain campaign didn't bear any fruit, many believe that the campaign organizers were dealt a bad hand. The UK was just recovering in the aftermath of a global pandemic. It'd be unfair to base the social impact of its entire workforce on a campaign that started in 2020. Restrictions were in place globally for a few years after the pandemic had wrapped up, and a sense of normalcy started creeping in around 2022 to 2023. Members of the Leave group argued that only assessments from that period and onwards would be credible when discussing the social impact of Brexit on Britain's workforce. Ask and you shall receive, because economists Jonathan Portes and John Springstead released an early assessment of the impact of Brexit on Britain's labour market covering that exact time frame, and answering some of the UK and the world's most asked questions. Are new immigration laws more restrictive and damaging for migration-dependent work sectors? Or have the laws helped the UK's population and actually bettered its economy in more ways than some? The assessment was made to show how many EU and non-EU workers would have been employed if pre-pandemic migration trends had continued, compared to the actual employment figures from the annual population survey. By September 2022, there was a significant shortfall of around 460,000 EU origin workers. Somewhat of it was offset by an increase of about 130,000 non-EU workers. Still, resulting in a net loss of approximately 330,000 workers. That's 1% of the labor force. This shortfall was more evident in sectors that relied heavily on less skilled workers. In transportation and storage, wholesale and retail, accommodation and food, manufacturing, construction, and administration and support, there were significant deficits of EU origin workers, while non-EU origin workers also saw shortfalls in hospitality and administration. Their numbers generally held steady in less skilled sectors. In more skilled sectors like healthcare, education, and ICT, an increase in non-EU workers more than compensated for the loss of EU workers, particularly in healthcare where the new system is more liberal. Increased immigration from refugees and students, many of whom would eventually enter the workforce, especially as the government has made it easier for foreign students to work in the UK post-study. Also, EU workers who left the UK may return under the EU settlement scheme. The new system, as promised by the Leave Group, no longer granted EU citizens automatic work rights in the UK. They must apply for visas, just like everyone else. In the end, the economists concluded that employers might respond by raising wages and prices, reducing production, or investing in automation. However, a combination of higher wages, prices, and reduced output is likely, especially for work that's hard to automate. If the government finds this problematic, they could ease immigration for work purposes, such as reducing visa costs and eliminating the immigration health surcharge on visa holders. Interestingly, the assessment did not include data from 2020 and 2021 to avoid unreliability. In the end, if the question is whether Brexit impacted the UK's workforce, the answer would be a resounding yes. For Leave advocates, Brexit was supposed to signal a new era in the UK, one marked with soaring employment rates and higher-paying jobs. Unfortunately, neither of that has happened just yet. While there still might be time to recuperate and rewind, the fact of the matter is that post-Brexit UK has been finding it hard to adjust to new immigration laws that restrict free movement. Some believe that Brexit in itself was overambitious and lacked foresight. Others believe that this is nothing more than a minor hiccup, and future campaigns will eventually tackle existing concerns. Thanks for watching. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe for more, and while you're here, check out some of our other videos.